can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. With that inspirational quote by late US President Abraham Lincoln, let's start off this edition of Vantage Point. And as always, we're joined by Dr. Jaya, who will be speaking to us about some of the developing stories that made it to headlines on the news throughout the week. And we'll be speaking about the SLFP division and also the appointment of the new AG. And also we'll be speaking a little bit about the Indo-Sri Lanka Joint Commission meeting that happened with the presence of Foreign Minister of India, Sushma Swaraj. A very good evening to you, Dr. Jaya.
Good evening, Stephanie. Good to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be on the show, actually. Let's just start off today's Vantage Point with a little bit of a controversial story that has really brought itself up to the headlines and throughout the week. The AG's appointment. Jayanta Jayasuriya was appointed by the Constitutional Council last week, and we saw the acting Attorney General being denied of this post, and he has apparently been given a post of a diplomatic posting, and he has politely declined it. And does this mean that Suhada Gamlath will be brought back to the Supreme Court as a Supreme Court judge? What is his future going to be?
Well, Stephanie, I mean, of course, I wouldn't know that, but from what I gather, because I do have people I know in the AG's department, and I'm told that the present choice is a good one. So what's controversial is not the personality. Jayanta Jayasuriya is spoken of well. What has been a little controversial has been the process, because this is a test for the post-19th Amendment Independent Commission driven or filtered process within the Sri Lankan state. So that's been questioned, but overall, as I said, the choice seems to be acceptable, seems to be a respected professional.
But that's not been quite the case, because reports say that the Constitutional Council seemed very divided over what choice they wanted to make.
Yeah, so that's the process. That's the process.
So does that mean if this is one of their biggest major appointments that the Constitutional Council intervened doing, but even during this they look divided, does this mean that the Constitutional Council could go ahead in the future with its proceedings?
Well, that's a good question, Stephanie, because there's this line in the US, the system isn't working, that's what they say. Now, is the post-19th Amendment system working in Sri Lanka? Or is there far too much filtration? Is there an unwieldiness? Does it make for gridlock? I think they narrowly avoided gridlock here. So, earlier the system was top-heavy because there was too much power concentrated in the hands of the President after the 18th Amendment. I'm not in agreement with the critique, as you know, of the 78 Constitution itself, but certainly post-18th Amendment it was top-heavy. But now, has it become top-heavy because we have all these commissions stuffing the system? And is that slowing down what is most important, that is decision-making? If you have a system that's like a mechanoset gone wild, because everyone has different ideas as to what's best for reform, and if decision-making is impeded in relatively small matters in peacetime, what would happen to decision-making on matters that are far more strategic? That's the question. So, what we read in the papers about the toing and froing over the AG doesn't speak well for how the system is working. We also have to remember, Stephanie, that is not just post-19th Amendment with the independent commissions. You have two parties that are in coalition but don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything. So those different perspectives also feed in. It doesn't always make for consensus, it doesn't always make for fusion. So you've got that as well. It's a new situation. That's what's important to understand. Post-19A, and with a coalition of the two major parties which we have never had before. And it's a coalition that's not really smoothly integrated. It's a coalition between parties that have different perceptions of how things should be done. So this is the new situation, the new equation, and there are times when it seems to lead to gridlock.
But Dr. Jayathilaka, do you think that you were talking about a mix of two different parties in a coalition government? Doesn't that usually bring and shape policy in the long run? Because when you have an opposition within the party, there's a lot of, shaping and trimming that could take place within the party itself, in the government itself. So don't you think it's a good thing that we have two parties together as a coalition government working to make or enact laws in the country?
Well, theoretically it could, but this is Sri Lanka. And you don't have democracy within those parties. Now, I'm not sure that the United National Party at any level has deliberated some of the positions that the government has taken, especially the Prime Minister, on very controversial matters such as accountability and foreign participation in accountability and so on. The party has not had a discussion. Even the cabinet hasn't had a discussion. So that's the UNP. And even within the SLFP, I'm not sure that there is democratic deliberation, because even the decision to go into coalition was kind of rubber stamped by a central committee and a working committee which had been reshuffled, bringing in people who had been defeated at the August 2015 elections in the preferential voting of the SLFP voters. So a coalition would be fine if it were post-war Germany, like the famous Grand Coalition under Konrad Adenauer, which was for the reconstruction of Germany, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. But when it's Sri Lanka today, there is no great national challenge facing it. Or if there is one, which is of post-war reconciliation, there has not been a consensus in terms of policies, which way should we go. When you do not have a clear process of consensus between the two major parties, then what a coalition does is it makes opaque the actual unresolved contradictions between these two parties. I mean, frankly, the Prime Minister seems to have one position and the President another on a number of things, and that reflects or is reinforced by different ideological and philosophical perspectives of a centre-right party and a centrist or centre-left SLFP. I'm not sure the coalition is working.
Now, speaking about human rights and reconciliation and the government's work in making that a reality, we need to speak about UN Chief Prince Said Al Hussein's visit to Sri Lanka. And we can do a little bit of a comparison between the former UN Chief Navanithan Pillai's visit and the current UN Chief's visit to Sri Lanka. There was a little bit of a difference where during former Chief's visit to Sri Lanka, we saw the former president on a visit to Belarus, and he only came back to Sri Lanka just a day before her departure, and that really set a bad impression on the country's part, and we saw a little bit of a disparity then. And also, this time around when the UN chief entered the country, he saw a lot of, apparently he even acknowledged that there is major difference that has taken place in the country, and he welcomed the government's new measures to towards its leadership, towards what it wants to do in the country. And also, what sort of a tone have they both set on their visit to the nation?
Stephanie, I think we often forget that we've had 3, not 2, Human Rights High Commissioners visiting Sri Lanka. 2 of them visited under the previous administration, the Rajapaksa administration. One visited during the first term, the other visited during the second term, and Prince Zaid is the third who was visited under the new government. So, the comparison should not only be between Nabi Pillai and Zaid's visits, but Louise Arbour, Nabi Pillai and Zaid. Now, the Louise Arbour visit, I think, was the one that went off best. It was during the war. President Rajapaksa made the invitation to Louise Arbour in my presence in Geneva in 2007. And, he was bold enough to say, come and take a look. That meeting went off very well. Louise Arbour was very tough on Sri Lanka. She she talked about crimes against humanity, war crimes. She wanted an international investigation, but the government of the day at that time, the Rajapaksa first term, it balanced openness with red lines, drawing of red lines on issues of national sovereignty. It wasn't rude at all. Human rights was handled by Minister Mahinda Samarasinghe. And in fact, I think this is the right model to adopt even now. The Geneva Human Rights Council was not handled by the foreign minister. It was handled by the Minister of Human Rights. And Mahinda Samarasinghe, I was in Geneva, Mahinda Samarasinghe was in Colombo as minister. We handled the visit. Mahinda Samarasinghe took Louise Arbour around, and at the final press conference, when she said things that the government of Sri Lanka disagreed with, he politely but respectfully disagreed at the press conference. I think that was the model of how Sri Lanka should handle things. Now, Navi Pillai, the Mahinda Rajapaksa's second term, the Ministry of Human Rights abolished. Geneva handled supposedly by the foreign minister, but actually by the ghastly presidential advisor on international relations, Sajin Vas Gunawardena, and his ally in the foreign ministry, the secretary Shenuka Senemiratne. The whole thing went haywire. Navi Pillai was too aggressive, and the government was rude and crude. So it was a disaster, a needless disaster. There was only one minister who handled Navi Pillai well during that visit, and that is Vasudevan Anakara, who was the minister of the implementation of the policy of trilingualism. That went off very well. Not because Vasudevan Anakara rolls over for foreigners or agrees to international pressure, but because he's a gentleman who knows how to defend national sovereignty while being civil about it. The others didn't do that. Now we come to the Zaid Al Hussein visit. That's very different from the Navi Pillai visit because in the substance is different. Louise Arbour and Navi Pillai were saying something that the government of the day disagreed with and didn't want to comply with. That's an international investigation or an investigation with international participation into human rights, war crimes and crimes against humanity, against violations. So therefore there was some tension, inevitable tension. There was an asymmetry. But even there, as I said, the Louise Arbour visit was handled well, with dignity. The Navi Pillai visit was handled terribly, which is the best example of how foreign policy or the handling of foreign relations was different between the first Rajapaksa term, the wartime, and the post-war second term. But Zaid Al Hussein didn't have that problem because the government of the day has agreed with him. Zaid Al Hussein's report is welcomed in the Geneva Resolution of 2015, which the government co-sponsored, and therefore says it's committed to. So there was no reason for any friction. Therefore it went much better than the Navi Pillai visit, but the government also behaved better. But it went too far, I think, in the other direction. Unfortunately, Sri Lankans tend to swing from one extreme to the other in anything and everything they do. It is really funny because this is the country of Theravada Buddhism, and if there's anything we should be good at and we should look for is a middle path. But instead, we were rude during the Navi Pillai visit and we rolled over during the Zaid Al Hussein visit. And there's another way of doing this. And I think that the first Rajapaksa term and Mahinda Samarasinghe's handling of Louise Arbour, who I was handling in Geneva at the other end, I think that was the model of how to do things. Don't roll over, but don't be rude. So I think we've swung from rudeness and crudeness to rolling over and compliance. And neither are the way that I would like to see Sri Lanka go.
So Dr. Jayatilaka, despite the country's sovereignty being under threat because of foreign investigators being involved in the whole investigations process. What are the other concerns do we have in foreign investigators being involved in the whole process of investigating into the missing?
Well, Stephanie, there are two things you have to watch out for. Whether the investigations and the whole process will be routed through the Attorney General's Department and the existing courts, or whether there will be a special prosecutor's office which bypasses the long established Attorney General's Department in Sri Lanka, and whether the existing courts will be bypassed and a special court will be set up. Now that's very dangerous, especially if you have foreign participation and foreign investigators, because those investigators, Stephanie, I mean, we know what happens in other parts of the world. Who says they're not going to take their orders from their own capitals? From Washington, London, Delhi, wherever. Foreign investigators. Who knows that whether or not they are going to be reached out to successfully by the Tamil diaspora lobbyists. So, foreign investigators means you can expect some kind of skewed result. It can even be a setup, but they can doctor the stuff. They can say, look, these bones were of children, when they're not. But Sri Lankan investigators, who then, if they so desire, send whatever material they've gathered to laboratories of their choice overseas, if our laboratories can't do it, now that's a different story. But foreign investigators in this polarized situation, that's very bad, because it can be a setup. It's not a good thing at all.
Now, moving on to another matter of concern, Indian External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj visited the country for the Indo-Sri Lanka Joint Commission meeting. But the minutes recorded do not say anything much about them speaking about the bottom trawling or the legal measures that were taken by fishermen, like bottom trawling and all of that. And also they've said that crossing of the international maritime boundary line was not discussed during this whole meeting. Does this mean that we are tipping a little bit of our balance? And are we really trying to be submissive to the big India that's kind of, dominating the region?
Well, Stephanie, again, this is the pendulum swing which Sri Lanka goes through. We mishandled our relations with India during the Rajapaksa's second term. Relations had been handled well with India in the first term during the war by Basil Gota and Lalit Viratunga. They were badly handled in the second term. And now we are overcompensating. It's not necessary to overcompensate, but we are overcompensating by this perceived tilt towards India. The newspapers tell us that India sent a note objecting to us buying the fighter jets that the Air Force had earmarked, that is from Pakistan, and it's a joint creation of the Chinese and the Pakistanis, and that India preferred us to buy their own fighter jet, and now we are not buying any. You can't have a country without a first line of defense, without interceptor aircraft, when you have old interceptors. Not that we can fight anybody, but you need a tripwire, which at least buys you time in case of an incursion, so that your diplomats can do the job in the United Nations and so on. But right now, because of Indian objections, if we have to go by the papers, we've suspended a decision on interceptor aircraft, or we are going with the Indian aircraft, which has got a lot of bad press internationally. So that's one problem. The other is ECTA. One of the most impressive civil society performances I saw recently was on YouTube by a young doctor called Anuruddha Padani, who was the head of the GMOA. The guy studied at Oxford and Texas, University of Texas. He's a child neurologist. He's highly qualified. He speaks very well. And he has some very serious concerns about the impact of ECTA on the services, the high-end services sector. Health, but not only. He pointed out that the IT sector is a kind of a portal that leads into all other sectors, because everything is connected with IT. And if you allow an outsider into your IT sector, you're opening everything up. and that is serious security considerations. Now, he may be right, he may be wrong, but these are important concerns, and they're not from rabble. You know, these are highly qualified young doctors. So these are issues where the national interest is involved. I don't think a government should be pro-Indian or anti-Indian. It should be pro-Sri Lankan, friendly with India, but have a clear sense of the national interest. And the national interest dictates that whether it is on our first line of defense, our interceptor aircraft, or more importantly on ECTA, or certainly this bridge which is supposed to connect Tamil Nadu with northern Sri Lanka, we need far more deliberation at all levels of the political system. We need experts, Sri Lankan experts to be brought in for consultation, and we need a national consensus debated in Parliament. And I don't see that happening, and that's very scary.
Well, Dr. Jayathilaka, the SLFP seems split yet again. First we saw it during the presidential elections and then during the general elections. And with the local government elections just around the corner, there's a little bit of a dilemma that's going on in the party itself, a tug of war, you may say. And what does it mean that at this juncture for SLFP to have such a rift within the party? What does it mean that it's going to bring to the SLFP with the local government elections just around the corner?
Well, a split seems inevitable now, but it could have been prevented. I mean, I'm not supportive of either side in the split. I'm kind of non-aligned. But I have to say this, in the 65 years that the SLFP has been in existence, and it's 65 years this year, it was founded in 51, the SLFP has played one of three roles, and today it has been deprived of all three roles and the status that goes with it. The SLFP has either been a party of government, where it has headed a coalition, and it's not that anymore, or it's been the main party of the opposition, which it clearly isn't anymore, or it has been the second largest party in opposition, but it has had its own status as an opposition party. And that's not the case anymore, despite the fact that there are 50 MPs in opposition led by Dinesh Gunawardena, the joint opposition. Now, had the joint opposition been allowed its independent status, then I think this lurch to a breakaway party could have been stopped. But it wasn't. So, the SLFP has been deprived of all three of the roles that it played in 65 years. What's it going to do? Obviously, it's going to find an approximation of one of those roles. If it means that it has to form a new party, those people, that dynamic will lead to the formation of a new party. And it's a pity, it could have been stopped if Dinesh and guys had been given recognition. Now, there are those who say you can't have it both ways. You can't be in the SLFP and then be recognized as independence and so on, but that's not true. In 1972, the Communist Party of Sri Lanka split. Minister of Housing, Peter Kahneman, was the lead of the party. He was in government as the Minister of Housing. The founder of the party, Dr. S.A. Wickramasinghe, and a very vibrant young MP, Sarath Muttetuwegama, were in opposition. But they didn't leave the United Front. They didn't leave the Communist Party. They didn't leave the United Front. They left the United Front government. But they were recognized as a separate faction in Parliament when they sat in opposition, when they crossed the floor. Now, that is what should have been done. Since that has not been done, there's no option. The SLFP is no longer in government. They are just hanging on to the UNP. There's nobody to play the role, no recognized party to play the role of the democratic anti-UNP opposition, the counterbalance. Dinesh has not been allowed to do that in Parliament. So it looks like there will be a new formation, and that looks like it's going to happen. There's another factor, Stephanie, because the Tamil people have a moderate parliamentary opposition, the TNA. The Muslim people have the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress. I regard both as moderate parties, as liberal parties, and nationalist parties, that is, they represent the identity of those communities. The singular majority feels that as they are communitarian, not communal, but communitarian interests, or their political identity is not represented because the party that traditionally did so for 65 years is in a coalition in a subordinate role with the UNP. So there's that as well, the identity politics of the majority community in this country. That will find another home because it's been kicked out of its own home, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. So those two reasons seem to lead in the direction of the formation of some kind of alternative. How long that last one doesn't know, because the DUNF didn't last very long. The Sri Lanka Mahajana Party has lasted, but not as anywhere as strong as it was. So these third parties usually play the role of a platform which takes the leaders back to the leadership of the party they left in the first place. Chandrika left the SLFP, formed the SLMP, a breakaway with her husband Vijay, and then came back to the SLFP as the presidential candidate. Gamini Disnayak and Lalit Adurat Mudali left the UNP, formed the DUNF, the Tigers killed Lalit. Gamini came back to the UNP as the presidential candidate of the UNP. Of course, he was killed by the Tigers too. So that seems to be the story. When people find that they have no room, they move out. SWRD moved out of the UNP in 1951. Came back not as the UNP leader, but eventually wound up Prime Minister in 5 years. So it seems like a revolving door. But in a certain situation, such as the one in which the SLFP has placed itself now, it looks like there are people who will go through that revolving door before they come back in through that revolving door.
Certainly we will have a major development taking place by the end of next week, and we'll certainly feature it on Vantage Point. And thank you so much, Dr. Jayatilaka, for joining us tonight. And viewers, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope and you enjoyed our Vantage Point edition this time around. And you can also join us and the conversation by visiting our Twitter handle and following our Twitter handle, Newsfirst_EN, and you can comment and post your comments and talk to us about what your concerns, and we'll certainly feature it on Vantage Point next week. Thank you for joining us.